Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I'm here with the man himself, Callan Wink, who wrote this dope book, Beartooth. It's a heist novel. It's a story about smuggling some antlers down a dangerous river. It's all the things you want if you both love Reservoir Dogs and Cormac McCarthy. Let me introduce Callan a little bit, and then we'll get right to it. On The Thoughtful Bro, we're live streaming, as always, on A Mighty Blaze. We're here to talk about what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. And A Mighty Blaze, where we air, is an all-volunteer initiative connecting writers and readers virtually. Thanks for tuning in here or on the podcast, wherever you hear this. At A Mighty Blaze, we're never asking for money. If you want to show us the love, just tell your friends about us. You can repost us, like us, all the things on social media. But if you are in this mood to spend money, head over to bookshop.org and order one of these bad boys. Books about the real Yellowstone, the Yellowstone where you hunt for your meat, put tires on the old truck, and smuggle those elk antlers. It's a great book. It's a great read. Everybody thinks so. I am going to unpack all the different ways that this book is working, why it's unusual, why it's necessary, and why it's one of those one-sitting slim gem reads. We'll put a link to buy it, as I said, in the chat from bookshop.org and support indie booksellers. And if you want to ask Callan a question, as always, just pop it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. Here's a little bit more about Callan. He's the author of the novel August and the collection of short stories Dog Run Moon. He's been awarded fellowships by the National Endowment for the Arts and Stanford University, where he was a Wallace Stegner Fellow. His stories and essays have appeared in the New Yorker, Granta, Playboy, Men's Journal, and the Best American Short Stories. He lives in Livingston, Montana, where he is a fly fishing guide on the Yellowstone River for much of the year. Going to talk about that too. His latest novel, Beartooth, Juno Diaz called it one of the best and fiercest heist stories since A Simple Plan. Great book, great movie. An unstoppable literary treasure. That's badass. What a great blurb. Callan, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, man. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm happy you wrote this book. I'm happy I read this book. And what I will say is I was going on Goodreads, reading all the comments about this book, and you were getting a compliment that I don't know if I've ever seen anywhere else. And you were getting it again and again and again. And the compliment was, I wish this book was longer. like there's always, even for great books, there's the comment, I wish this book was shorter. Like it was good, but could have been 100 pages shorter. This book was, I could have done with another 50, could have done with another 100 pages. I think it's a big compliment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it. I'd rather have that than the other. I wish this book was 100 pages shorter.
That's right.
Yeah, definitely.
So this book is great. It's sort of like or it's being marketed as, but I think it lives up to the hype. It's sort of a heist story. It's sort of like a drug run gone bad. I was feeling very No Country for Old Men, very Cormac McCarthy. But why don't you, just for people who haven't read the book yet, give us a thumbnail sketch of what it's about?
Yeah, sure. So it follows two brothers living near Yellowstone National Park in Montana. They've recently lost their father and have been saddled with some debt, medical bills, also this house that's sort of falling down around them. And you know, the brothers are close in age, but they're pretty different. Thad, the older brother, is maybe a little more socially adept. Hazen struggles to sort of fit in with modern society for numerous reasons. And, you know, a lot of the novel is about their relationship. They're eventually approached by this sort of shadowy figure to do this illegal act in Yellowstone Park. And so, you know, disaster ensues.
I love that shadowy figure, the Scott.
Yeah, the Scott.
I feel like he's destined for a spin-out series. But you know, obviously one of the big successes in media in the last few years has been Yellowstone, the TV show. And that's all big money, big rancher, that kind of life. And this book is about a totally different kind of person from a totally different part of the social stratum. I'm just curious, like, have you watched that show, Yellowstone?
I watched about one episode, and you know, no offense to anyone, but it wasn't for me.
Tell me why.
Mostly for the reasons you said. I mean, it's sort of this weird glamorization of the Montana I know. I mean, it's not it doesn't seem to deal with the struggles of like the people I'm familiar with in Montana. It's sort of like a soap opera set in Montana. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the setting. Like before, we're gonna get into everything that the book is about and all the writing and everything, which is so great. But I think we got to like set the stage a little bit because it is just so off the beaten path. This is a book that's about a kind of person that you don't see written about a whole lot. So just kind of building on what you just said, these are people who, the roof is caving in. There's like an old truck in the driveway. They're hunting for their meat. There's a lot of beer and beef jerky here. Like, tell us about who these people are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they were boys who were raised by their father, sort of homeschooled to some degree, and while their father educated them in certain things, certain other things were sort of left out, like how to survive, and pay your taxes and things like that. So they're pretty adept at things in the natural world. Maybe some people would call them like survivalists, but I don't really ever think it's not like some choice they made to drop out of society. It's just like that is where they lived, and they make what little money they make, sort of cutting and selling firewood. And I guess I know people that are more close to this than you might think. I mean, it's a way of living that people in out of the way places in Montana being one of them. The hunting, especially. I mean, some of my good friends, would never buy beef at the store. Every bit of meat they eat is something they've killed. So that stuff's not incredibly out of line with people I know. No.
Yeah, is this like, how much of it is your life also? I'm not suggesting this is like autobiographical, but like, you say people like this, but I don't know, do you hunt for your own meat and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm not much of a hunter anymore. I was when I was younger, but I'm a fishing guide. I do that for work. That's my real job. Writing is kind of something I do on the side in the off season. And so, a lot of this book is kind of stemmed from my love for the Yellowstone River. I mean, that's the river I guide on the most, and the river plays a big part in this novel. So it's an environment I'm very familiar with and spent a lot of time in.
I think at one point I heard you describe the area, like the setting where this book is, to be the furthest you can get from a road in the lower 48 states. Is that right? Like, is that where this area is?
That point exists in the backcountry of Yellowstone Park. Yeah, it is the furthest you can get from a road. It's somewhere in the thoroughfare of Yellowstone. Yep.
And that's a lot where you spend your time, like when you're a fishing guide?
Yeah, I'm doing my stuff a little closer to the civilization there, where I guide the Yellowstone most of the time is actually just outside of Yellowstone National Park. It's a huge river. I mean, it's over 600 miles long, longest undammed river in the lower 48 states. So there's a lot of river there.
It's sort of badass how you're like, you've written for the New Yorker, and you've been National Endowments for the Arts grant and all that stuff, and like writing is just this like side hustle that you do a few months out of the year. I'm curious, like these people that you take on your trip, you take them out for whatever it is, however amount of money per day. They're probably kind of wealthier people. Like, are they interested in the fact that you're like this like critically acclaimed writer?
Yeah. I don't bring it up 90% of the time. I over the years now, especially with having a few books out, a decent number of people now just get a hold of me because they've read my book actually. And then they want to go fish. So with those folks, we talk about it, but probably the vast majority of the people I take, it's not something I really discuss too much. Fishing guiding it's a service job, not unlike bartending or any number of different things like that, where you're just basically facilitating their day, and it's very busy. I'm in a boat, I'm rowing, I'm making sure they're not, going to die in some way and untangling them when they get tangled, so there's not a lot of time for like, reflection. People often are like, oh, that must be such a relaxing job. And I'm like, no, not really.
Yeah.
It's actually busy and sort of stressful. Yeah.
I mean, as we all know, books is the place people come to make their millions. So when you make your billions of dollars as a writer, do you think you would like leave that job behind in a heartbeat, or what?
I mean, it would be hard, actually. I mean, a lot of the people, I've been doing it for over 20 years now. So, you know, a lot of the people I take have become friends. It's something I do every year. And so that would be sort of hard. And I like having a job that isn't writing, quite honestly. It gives my year a nice sort of split where at the end of fishing, I'm pretty ready to go write. And then at the end of writing, I'm ready to get back in the boat. I mean, I don't know about you as a writer, but I don't love staring at the computer screen and trying to write. I'd much rather be rowing a boat, especially in the summer. So,
I was curious about that too. So like, I think you were saying in the green room that like the season lasts from kind of like right about now, like kind of mid-March to say like October, and there's like a little bit of time off in the middle. But like during that time, are you like completely hibernating creatively, or is it sort of like you're out there on the boat and there's like a quiet moment and a phrase pops in your head and you like jot it down and you're sort of always sort of ruminating?
Yeah, no, I mean, I say I don't write for just about every day, whether I actually write anything down or not. But most days I at least have a few thoughts about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're coming to the end of your like quote writing season now. Like, did you write this winter?
I did, not as much as I should have. As it turns out, having a book come out is sort of counterproductive to actually writing. But I was in Costa Rica for the first 3.5 months of the winter surfing, and I wrote quite a bit down there.
What a life, man. You're just making us all jealous here. One more question for you before we get into your actual book, because I think your life is like, to be honest, way more interesting than most writers' lives. You were like pretty far removed from what I would call like the literary scene. Like you're not a guy who's living in, Long Island City or Brooklyn, used to be an agent, now you're writing, whatever it is, right? You're not part of that central kind of ecosystem. I'm just wondering like what you think about that. If you think anything at all. I mean, you're leading the kind of life you want to lead, it sounds like, but like, do you think it's good for you sort of like as a writer to be removed from it? Or do you sort of wish you were part of the action more?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I've never loved like being around a lot of other writers and talking about it all the time. So like living in Brooklyn would not work for me, but I guess the downside of living in a place that is so far removed from the publishing world. I mean, sometimes I do feel like I approach it with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Like maybe I'm not being taken seriously. They like it if I talk about the pretty mountains and trees, and that's okay. But not if you have like a thought,
Here we go.
The people, in New York or the coast, whatever, who are right? If I hear the term flyover country one more time, I'm going to puke.
Oh my God. All right, that's cool. All right, let's talk about the book, man. The book is so great. I mean, like, I know you have issues with the title. We'll talk. Is it true that you didn't really like this title?
No, I fought it forever. Yeah.
So what about? I mean, I've heard you interviewed a few times, and when people talk about this, they're always like, "But I love Beartooth," and as did I. But like, what I'm curious was the title that you wanted?
Oh, I had a few, and now it doesn't really matter, So.
Oh, you don't want to get into it?
No, not really. Okay. I lost, and I've come to terms with it,
Okay. I'm just trying to stir the pot, man.
Yeah. No, it was just, you got to pick your battles, and people who are smarter than me in the publishing world were pretty staunch on it. So I was like, all right, fine. Yeah, we'll do it. But it's grown on me. It's okay.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. So one of the great things about this book is it's structured, as I was saying, like a heist novel. And like, I love a good heist story. And I just want to like name a few like of the great tropes that I see here that are like, that you kind of like put in the wilderness. So like, there's a dead body on the first page, classic. But in this case, it's the body of an illegally hunted bear. There's this shadowy man, the Scot, who's asking them to do some crazy deal, right? And they refuse at first, but then they need the money. Love it. Then the heist itself goes terribly wrong. There's a bunch of like kind of unexpected mishaps and dangers, and people get involved who shouldn't be there. And then afterwards, and this is like the real pièce de résistance, it's like the heist happens, and then somebody just can't keep their mouth shut. And that is like, that's always the case with the heist. Just
Yeah.
shut up about it, but you can't.
Yeah, no, totally. You nailed it. I mean, I think that great Junot Diaz blurb, you know, I think that was a thing in the simple plan was, you know, the guy who can't keep quiet. So yeah, for sure.
But you, from what I understand, learning about your writing process and everything, you're not somebody who is like here to write heist stories or like be tropey. I mean, I think that you have a far more kind of organic writing style. So if I want to hear your answer, but I would guess that like it's sort of, you didn't set out to write a heist novel, that's just sort of how it came out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I got a lot of respect for people who write these more sort of plot driven kind of stories. It's probably not what comes naturally to me. However, I come from more of just like a literary fiction background where I just kind of write what's interesting me at the moment, and plot is sort of secondary often, but it's something I'm working on. I mean, I want to write novels that are very readable, you know, because I enjoy those myself. You know, we were talking about Cormac McCarthy and especially one like No Country for Old Men. I feel like he wrote that with a movie in mind, you know.
I think he like literally he did.
Yeah, I think so. You know, but that sort of thing, I like those sort of novels for sure. So it's something I'm interested in.
The two brothers at the center of the story is great. I mean, I come from a family of brothers. I love this kind of stuff. It felt very archetypal to me. It felt almost biblical. I mean, there's like the one brother who is smart and worrying and planning and responsible and has foresight, and the other one who's kind of more action-oriented, reckless, kind of courageous as well. And it's like, I think that pairing is like just sort of classic. I mean, can you just tell me about like, was it always like, hey, I want to kind of have these two brothers who are sort of foils for each other, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, the brothers were there from the very beginning, you know, and I can't say that I had a big plan for that, but just as I wrote, and this thing went through a lot of different sort of iterations. It started as kind of a short story many years ago, and then I wrote this really long, somewhat boring novel, and then I put it away for many years, wrote a different novel, and then I came back to it and cut it down to a novella that I thought was pretty good. And then, long story short, when we were trying to find publishers, they were like, how about you make this a novel? I expanded it again, but during that process, I think the brothers' relationship sort of solidified into what it is now, just with a lot of like writing, you know, where I had the two sort of types of person, and like you said, it did seem sort of like archetypal or you know, biblical even, and it wasn't something I was like thinking about when I started, but I recognized it as I was working on it, and then it kind of was natural to develop it.
I love it. Let's talk about the process of writing the book, because I've heard you talk about that the short story, then it becomes a novella, then it becomes a novel. Then you cut it back. And so can I just add, let's just like take this step by step. What was the original short story, the kind of the heist thing?
Yeah, it was exactly. It was the heist, you know, was the bulk of the story. And it was, when I was writing it, I was like, well, there's more here, you know, like I always liked the premise of the brothers going into Yellowstone Park and doing this illegal act. And I had that from the very beginning. That never really changed. But as I expanded it into a novel, I went down a few rabbit holes that were, you know, sort of ended up just being, you know, kind of boring. But the process of just putting it away for all that time, when I went back and looked at it, I was like, oh, like these are all the areas where, you know, I'm losing myself, you know, as I wrote it and it's boring to me. So anyway, it was very easy to cut with all that time having gone by. And then expanding it, I was able to do it a little more directed, and you know, it ended up working out okay. But yeah, long process on this one for sure.
So a couple thoughts about that. So one is, you know, that test of like, is something boring or not? For me, it's like, it's so instinctive. Like when I'm just rereading something that I've written, it's like my mind would just, a switch will flip and I'll just immediately be like, I'll get to the end of few sentences or a paragraph, and I'll be like, I don't remember anything I just read.
Yeah.
And I find that radar is like basically 100% accurate. It's when the mind just sort of switches off without you noticing, that's the cut.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I've always had like kind of poor retention of things I read, which used to annoy me when I was like in grad school and all these other people could remember every single thing they've ever read and like intelligently, but it just kind of like, it leaves me, you know. But the good thing, I think it actually helps as a writer, because one, when I'm writing, I'm not just like constantly remembering everything I've read and being like, oh, this is derivative of that or whatever. So a lot like kind of the blank slate, but also when I go back to revise things, like it had been a couple years since I read, but I like had forgotten large parts of what I had written. So it was as if I was seeing it for the first time. And so I was more easily able to discern areas that I was losing interest.
So I recently tried to resurrect a project of my own that I had written about 8 years ago. And I spent a good 6 months, I regret to say, well, no work is ever wasted, as they say, right?
Yeah, right.
But I spent 6 months kind of trying to revitalize this thing because I saw some good bits in it. Sort of, it sounds similar to you, but anyway, I forked it over to my agent, and he was like, "Nope, like this is just not working." And one of the things, there's a lot of reasons for that, but not to get into it all. But I think one thing was, you said you picked it up kind of 4 years later. I picked it up 8 years later. And I think that like, I look back at sort of like what I was thinking about and sort of like what I was doing in my life at that time. And it was very different than sort of what I'm doing right now in my life. And also just say the world around us is very different as well.
Sure.
But I guess, so the question is like, I wonder what like the horizon really is for that. Like how far back is sort of so far back that kind of who you were and the way you thought will seem kind of like a mismatch if you try to rewrite it who you are today.
Yeah, you know, I see what you mean there. And I don't know if I have like an answer on that, but I think it's one thing I realized with this is like the longer I do this, the more stingy I get with good ideas. So I think when I was younger and first starting, I was always just like, if a story didn't come pretty easily, I'm like, oh, this must not be good, I'm just going to start something else, you know. Now I've realized that like if you have a good premise that you like and you feel good about, it's worth hammering on it, because you might not have any other good ideas for a while. So there's sort of a finite number of those, I think. So you know, when you have a good one, it does pay to sort of keep on it. At least that's what I'm finding.
Warren Buffett, the famous investor, once said, all I need is one good investment idea every year.
Yeah,
that's enough to become a billionaire.
Yeah.
So I loved the opening scene of this book so much. You know, it's about this bear, and they've shot this bear, and now they're trying to get its gallbladder, because the gallbladder kind of like is worth something for medicinal purposes on like the Asian black market or something. So, but this scene is so graphic, and it's this guy Hazen, who's one of the two brothers. And, you know, you say he can take apart a bear almost without a knife. And you talk about him rummaging around in the guts of the bear, like he's rummaging around in like a junk drawer. I mean, it was like so much great language and imagery, and it's so visceral. Well, it's funny. One of the Goodreads reviewers said, this is actually the top Goodreads review that you have, the most liked Goodreads review. It's only one sentence long. It says, I can smell this book. So, and I think that first scene has like all this kind of smell and touch and noise in it. And it's so gross and so great. But I guess my actual question to you is like, when I read that scene, I was like, oh my God, it sounds like you have done this. Like, have you ever like, I mean, I don't know how you could write this scene without having done it. It was so vivid, but like, have you ever rummaged around in the guts of a bear?
Not a bear, but deer and elk, you know, so it translates pretty well. You know, I'm not a big hunter anymore, but I used to when I was a kid. And also now I sort of advertise my services to my friends. If I'm still in Montana and they have killed an elk, it's like all hands on deck, you know, so I'll help them pack out an elk. And, you know, at some point you're, you know, hands deep in a carcass for sure. So yeah, I've done it a fair amount.
And is it like Hazen in the sense that you could probably, like, your way around so much you could probably take it apart without even a knife?
No, I'm not that way, but I have friends that probably could. I'm
No
not
kidding.
the true hunter like some people I know. So, but when you recognize it in another person, it's sort of. And then in writing the Hazen character, I just sort of like exaggerated some things I've noticed with friends. Yeah.
Oh, it's so badass though. So I'm putting you on the spot here, but there is a request in the chat here that you might read a bit of it. Is that possible, or do you even have a copy of your book on hand?
No, I have a copy. Yeah.
All right. You want to just do like a minute or something, or whatever you want to do?
I could just read, the first couple pages.
Sure.
That work?
Yeah. Because the language, I wouldn't do it with everybody, by the way, but I think the language here is so great. I think it's definitely worth a reading.
All right. Thad had just shot a black bear out of season. It was a small yearling sow, and the rancid stink of it settled like a fog over the clearing where it died. The smell of a bear, Thad thought, had the flavor of nightmare about it. Putrefying flesh, fresh shit, all held together with something cloying and sweet, like smashed huckleberries just starting to ferment. This was the third one they'd killed this week, and Thad figured they could start heading home. 3 heads attached to 3 pelts, 12 paws, 3 gallbladders. On top of all their other gear, it was going to be a back-breaking hump over the mountain. He and his brother Hazen were 20 miles from the logging road where their truck waited, a cooler in the back with a block of ice and a 12-pack of Coors. Just thinking of the beer made Thad swallow reflexively. Should I keep going?
Yeah, go a little bit more, man. That's great.
Hazen was over at the edge of the timber splashing around in a small creek that looped through a stand of alders and meandered across the clearing. It was late summer, the grass was long and dry, and the creek running through it looked like a crooked part in a shock of thick blonde hair. Quit messing around. When we get this one cut up, we're out of here, Thad said. There's trout. We're not fishing. Get over here. I'd like to be home tomorrow morning. Hazen stomped out of the creek. Thad could hear him grumbling as he set to work. Although he tended to stray from the task at hand, Thad had to admit that his brother was faster at butchering than he was. Hazen could break down an animal so quick it was almost unnatural. It was like he had some strange elemental knowledge of how the parts all fit together. Sometimes he didn't even use his knife, just got the cut started, and then used his hands and fingernails to divide muscles and separate flesh from bone. Thad had seen him use his teeth to snap a particularly stubborn ligament or tendon. Might stop there.
Let's see. I mean, I would ask you what it's like to have your hands up in the guts of an elk or a deer, but now I already know, having read this book. People are always using these adjectives to describe your work, like visceral, raw, precise, vivid, atmospheric. Another Goodreads reviewer this was probably the most sensory book I've ever read. Talk to me about like what you're actually going for in like some of the nature physical writing. Do you have a certain kind of goal that you can articulate, or like your own? How would you describe your own style?
I mean, part of that comes from just how it's easy for me to progress when I'm writing, and some of that, like especially if I'm struggling or feeling like I don't know exactly where to go, if I really bear down and focus on the physical stuff, descriptions of things, actions of what the characters are doing, it sort of is like this bridge that keeps me going in the writing. Then other elements of plot and things start to develop, but a lot of it for me comes out of just like close attention to what's happening physically.
Awesome. All right. So I want to switch topics. I want to ask you about something which is about men in fiction. So this is like a conversation that's been going around the last year or two, just sort of like there's a big piece in the New Yorker or somewhere about how men don't write fiction anymore. Men aren't going to MFA programs. Men don't read, all this kind of stuff. And I'm just wondering, like, I mean, this is a man's book for sure. And I'm just wondering kind of like, I'm asking you this, even though you said earlier you're kind of not part of the scene, and this is a very sceney kind of conversation. But to the extent that you have thought about this, like, what do you think about that conversation and about like men reading fiction and men writing fiction, and how like it sort of sometimes appears that it's not happening as much as it used to, or in the way that it used to?
Yeah, it's something I would agree, and it's unfortunate, how do I put this? I was just at a big convention of booksellers in Denver, and there was not a lot of people there like me, basically.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the people concerned with the apparatus of publishing, book selling, whatever, I felt like maybe my audience is not there. But then, surprisingly, I had quite a few women say like, oh, I usually don't pick up books that are obviously a bunch of dudes, doing stuff in the backcountry of Montana, but they were like, I actually really liked it, so it's always nice when people who you're sort of surprised resonate, or found something to attach themselves to your book. But I especially like men in rural locations, I have some friends who read, but it's not common, as far as I can say. And that's unfortunate. I think the world would be a better place if more dudes in rural America read some novels, quite honestly.
Yeah, I agree. Real quick, back about that event in Denver. There's a bookseller from Skylark Books in Columbia, Missouri, named Mary Weber O'Malley. And Mary's the one who told me about your book like ages ago. Like somehow she reads books like 3 years before they come out. It's like before the books are even written, she has already read them. And she told me about this book ages ago and said that she loved it. And she said she met you. I'm sure you met like a zillion.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Skylark sounds that sounds very familiar.
Yeah. No, Mary O'Malley is awesome. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, on A Mighty Blaze, like last Friday, we had Nick Butler on, Nick Butler?
This Shotgun.
Shotgun Love Songs.
Got a new one out that's doing really well. Yeah. So.
Exactly. So Nick's a good dude. And he's been on the program before. And I was kind of talking to him about a similar thing. And he's like, well, the thing about men and reading is that there's this approach that men have to reading these days, which is that they only want to read like biography and nonfiction and business books because there's a feeling that like unless you're learning something that can like quote help you in your life, then it's wasted time. And I kind of wanted to like put that to you like in just those terms. Like, so a novel is not something that you are learning from in the sense that like you learn from a book that's like the 4-hour work week or whatever, right? But like, what do you think is quote like the value or whatever of a novel compared to these other books?
I mean, at least for me, it's a way to sort of, to some degree, experience like how other people perceive the world, and I think the novel is uniquely suited to doing that, more so even than a movie or even like a memoir, that sort of thing. You're able to inhabit people's outlook, maybe people that are vastly different from you or not, or people who are similar to you or experiencing obstacles that maybe you've had, and then seeing them navigate, will have some sort of bearing on your own life and how you understand your world. So for me, that is the benefit.
Yeah. It's so strange to me, man. I mean, like, I would just tell you, like, I've had the exact experience that you're talking about. I know that feeling precisely of like walking into a room and you just feel like there aren't, I think, you and I are probably close in age to each other, and just kind of looking around the room and just being like, boy, there just aren't a lot of people in my particular demographic here. I mean, and yet like, hey, I've given my life to this, you've given your life to this. And it's like, to me, it's like so instinctive. I like sort of don't even have time to think about who's involved in it or why I want to do it. It sort of seems like bigger than that. But there are times when I look around and I'm like, it's strange that I have ended up in this room,
Oh yeah, very much so. And it, if you just look at the books getting published, especially in literary fiction, it's sort of like we're not highly represented in the group of authors there, and just the whole publishing world, agents, publishers, everything. So it's always kind of amazing when I've managed to get another book published and whatever, maybe I'm finding readers that I'm not anticipating. Hopefully that's the case.
All right. Couple other random thoughts just about kind of nature. One is that it's like, I have these sort of like deep, dark files in my brain of like things I'm fascinated with. And maybe like terrified of, and one of them is the Yellowstone caldera. Like, I think you referred to it at one point as like the sleeping volcano, like under the characters. And for those who don't know what it is, I'm not a geologist, but it's basically there is a super volcano underneath Yellowstone Park, which is why there's all those geysers, and that's what's heating up all that water. It's funny. I looked it up today. There was even a Discovery Channel film called Super Volcano, and like I watched the trailer for it, and like this is like the first line of the trailer, like on the black screen, it says, "This is based on a true story. It just hasn't happened yet." And it's about how once the caldera explodes in a supervolcano, basically like all of North America will be covered in a kind of ashen winter for a decade. But I guess my question to you is, do you ever think about that? And what do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, living where I live, it's just like something everyone sort of has some awareness of, you know.
Yeah.
We make a lot of jokes about it, like, glad we're living here because we'll just be vaporized when it blows, and we won't have to do this like Cormac McCarthy, the road sort of eke it out, you know, nonsense. We'll just be gone. But yeah, I've always been interested in the caldera. You know, I wrote a short story years ago about this guy taking his girlfriend's son on this, who's like become obsessed with the caldera, you know, a younger, like 10, 12-year-old who's just like fixated on it, you know.
Yeah.
And they go on this sort of awkward drive around the whole, you know, like where they imagine it to be around the whole thing. And yeah, anyway, it's there's these things, you know, where I live, like that's one of them. You know, various elements of like, you know, the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery came through. I mean, it's like this sort of mythic background to the place where there's these stories about certain things that sort of flavor a lot of what I write.
Yeah. I've only been to Yellowstone a few times, but certainly it's like one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Is that part of why you keep doing your fishing stuff? Is just that like you just realize that you're living in this incredibly beautiful place?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I moved to that part of Montana over 20 years ago from Michigan, and you know, I fell in love with it immediately. And I'm very lucky to have. I mean, I've never had like a boss really. I've never had a job interview. I've been self-employed since I was 20. I don't make any money really, but like I'm surviving, and my lifestyle is, you know, like a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10. I did have a fishing client this past summer though. A longtime client asked me in like a quiet moment in the boat. She was like, "Callan, do you have a retirement plan?" I'm like, I just maybe have a heart attack doing this. I don't know. Cash in.
Yeah. Just one other thing about the nature aspect of it. You know, I had Eric Buchner on the show last week. His book is called Dream State. It's an Oprah book club pick. It's doing real well. And it's about a vacation home in Montana, but it's, you know, the people kind of only come there in the summer and whatever. But, you know, that book, it talks a lot about global warming. And I don't want to make this a discussion about global warming, truly. But what was interesting about your book was that, like, you know, you mentioned the wildfires there, and so does he. But it's like it was sort of amazing to me that a book about so much about natural beauty and that actually mentioned wildfires did not for a second talk about politics. And it was like, because it just seems to me that it's like, you can't ever even bring up nature. Like nature is just like another political issue today. Like it's for someone like me who lives on the East Coast and like in the suburbs, it's like, you know, I mean, there's trees around my house and stuff, but it's obviously nothing like Yellowstone, but it just feels like nature has sort of been ruined in a certain way by the way that it is merely a political football. And I just want to say, this is not against anybody who wants to talk about global warming, like have at it. But I thought it was interesting, and it was slightly refreshing that you just like never even went there. And I'm just wondering if you have like, if there was a reason for that, or it's just not something that really you were thinking about.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's kind of, it falls in line with what you're saying. I've noticed in my writing, you know, do some nonfiction stuff, whatever. Yeah. But there's certain tropes, if you will, now that almost guarantee that you get something published, shoehorn some global warming in this thing, and all of a sudden, you know, it has like a marketable quantity. You know what I mean?
I see. Yep.
It kind of annoys me, you know, when
Yeah.
I was in the past, I've been writing for magazines and things, and just any story idea was like, how can we put some global warming in this one? You know what I mean? Or climate change. And I'm not saying that I don't, you know, believe in climate change or whatever. It's beside the point here. In my novel, I mean, these characters are not waking up in the morning and being worried about the climate change. The fire is a fact of life. They're worried about like trying to get their truck working so they can go to work. And I think that's probably a vast majority of working class people. You know, environmental concerns like that seem a little bit far removed from their real life, for right or wrong. I'm not saying that. And I mean, I'm a fishing guide, and I make my living on a natural resource. And you know, climate change is a thing. Also, just development is probably the biggest environmental issue. You know, it's people building their second, third home on the banks of the Yellowstone River. So I can talk about that for a long time. You know, can I directly ascribe a fire to, you know, global warming because of some misguided, you know, environmental policy? I can't, but I can directly say, like, we don't need any more homes along the bank of the Yellowstone River, and people are still building them. So
all right, so I'm going to go to some audience questions in a second, but I just had one other thing for you. So as I said, like, I'm not like, I don't surf, I don't fish. I mean, I love the beauty and grandeur of nature as much as the next person, but I just, like, you know, where I live, there's like just two things I don't really do. And yet, Callan, like, both surfing and fishing, like, live in my mind as great metaphors for the creative process. And so, like, I am just wondering, though, because I don't want to say what these metaphors are to me and what, like, surfing and fishing mean to me as a creator of creative metaphors. But, like, I'm just curious, like, do they mean something to you? Do you, like, think about fishing as a metaphor for writing or surfing as a metaphor for writing?
They're similar in that I think, like, you know, writing, like fishing, not so much fishing guiding, but actually going fishing, and surfing for sure. They're like practices. They're like lifetime practices, you know, like doing yoga. People always talk about your yoga practice. Whereas you're, you know, it's easy to get sort of like caught up in the achievement stage where you're like, if I catch this, or if I, you know, get to this stage in my surfing or yoga or whatever you're doing, you know, I will have achieved, you know, happiness, whatever. But in reality, it's just the process of doing it, you know. And for me, the surfing and the writing and the fishing, especially used to be that way when I would actually go fishing. Now I just take people fishing, but it's just something you can apply yourself to every day, and sort of give shape to your life.
Yeah. I love that, man. Yeah, for me, I mean, a non-surfer, non-fisher, I mean, the surfing thing, the way I think about it is just like, you just keep taking the waves in, and, like, you don't really know if it's going to be a good wave or a bad wave until sort of like you're already on it. And I feel like it's that way for me with ideas that come through me. It's just like, you just get up every morning, get on the wave, and let's see. And then as far as like the fishing thing, that one has, like, always been so big for me. And I think it's big in, like, Old Man in the Sea. I mean, like, that's sort of always on one level on which I took that Hemingway book, is just that, like, to me, like, the sea or the river is like an unconscious, and it's like you put your line down and it's like you pull something up, and you sort of, like, as a creator, these you probably have this experience, like, the things that come out of you are, like, sometimes so surprising. And, like, that moment when you're reeling something in, I mean, I've been fishing a bunch of times, but I don't fish like you, but, like, when you're reeling that thing in and you at last see it, you're like, oh my God, like, that thing was in me, you know? Yeah.
No, it's nice. It's sort of a surprise for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, let's just take a few questions here. Let's see. Some questions about what kind. All right. How about what kind of fish you catch? There's a question.
Yeah, mostly trout, brown trout, rainbow trout, cutthroat trout.
And do you eat the fish that you catch?
Not routinely. Fly fishing, at least where I live, has become catch and release. And there's so many people fishing now, X number of fish. It sort of behooves us to keep the fish in the river. It's a pretty low impact. I mean, I say that. I'm not, the fish
Yeah.
might have a different story, but if done properly, catch and release with a small barbless fly, the fish are fine most of the time. So yeah, it's in order to keep the resource vibrant, we put them back, but I'll keep a few every year.
Then there's one other question here about, do you have any brothers? And like, was the brother thing based on your own family?
No, I had two sisters actually, but I always sort of wanted brothers, and I had a couple friends growing up that had brothers and close in age, and I grew up a very rural location in Michigan. And summers I would ride over to my buddy's house and we'd just play basketball, and then he and his brother would be fist fighting within the first half an hour, in the grass, and that was just pretty normal. So I always wished I had that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I have brothers and I also have sons. So, I mean, I just like that kind of, I love that stuff. And that's why I love reading stories like this. It just reminds me of my life. All right, Callan, it's been an awesome interview. I have one last question for you. It's a question I ask everybody who comes on the show. And it's this: let's imagine that you have a perfect reader for Beartooth and they've just finished reading it. They close it. They've like gotten everything that you wanted them to get in your wildest dreams, and they loved it just the way you hoped it would be loved. They close the book, they look out the window. Just tell me in like a phrase or even a word, how is that reader feeling?
Maybe feeling like they want to go for a walk outside.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's beautiful, man. Can you just tell me, let me just ask that one follow-up question on that. Like when you go for a walk outside, like in just this mood that you're talking about, like why do you like it? What do you get out of that?
Oh man, I mean, all the, now they're coming out with all these supposed health benefits to, walking and barefoot walking and all these things. But I mean, I think just deep down, we all realize that we're not meant to be staring at our screens all day. And like so much of the discontent in modern society, I think stems from the fact that we're forced to do that more than we should. And so anytime you can break away from that is just good for your mental and physical health.
Yeah. All right, folks. The book is called Beartooth by Callan Wink. Callan, I know you're in Austin, Texas today, carving a little bit of time out for us. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was really fun. Good conversation.
All right, folks. See you next time on Thoughtful Bro. Thank you, everybody who showed up. See you again soon.